Hey everybody, it's Anna and welcome back to my booktube channel. This video is going to be my Geekly wrap-up for the week of June 8th through June 14th. This week I read 5 books and I listened to 2 audiobooks. Before you start freaking out, no, it wasn't like 5 giant chunky tomes. I ended up reading a lot of short books this week. I read an Uncanny issue, I read a poetry collection. One of my audiobooks was only 4 hours long, so it may seem like I did a lot of reading this week, but I really just finished up a bunch of things that I had been reading and had already read. And before we get into this video, again, I know I've mentioned this a few times on this channel, but with the situation regarding the Black Lives Matter movement changing so quickly, and then with this last week being an absolute travesty for the rights of Black trans people and the safety of Black trans people, I am keeping the description of my videos updated with ways that you can support, but please do go do your own research and make sure that you are specifically supporting Black, queer, and trans folks during this time. It is not a good time for the safety and health of Black trans people, and especially if you're queer, like, celebrate Pride Month by protecting everybody, right? So let's go ahead and talk about the books that I read this week. I finished reading Uncanny Magazine issue 32, which is January-February. I'm a little bit behind on those in case you didn't notice. We're not going to talk about that, but this one, oh no, I spilled tea on myself. Fabulous. Let's try that again. This issue of Uncanny was actually a little bit of a reversal for me. I ended up enjoying the short fiction a lot more than the essays and the poetry. Usually I find like one short story that I like, and then all of the others are just sort of like, okay, these were fine, but let's go to the poetry. Not the case this time. I really enjoyed that, and I'm excited to be getting caught up on this. Next, I read White Fragility, Why It's So Hard for White People to Talk About Race by Diangelo. This book was an absolutely phenomenal read. I encourage everybody to read it, especially if you are white. It's going to challenge you to think about the way that your privilege intersects with the world and the way in which you specifically as a white person, since the author is a white woman writing for a white audience, how your privilege and your history comes with you in all of the interactions that you have. It really like demystifies and clarifies the fact that racism is not just individual acts of bigotry. Racism is a system that is designed to oppress, and that regardless of your own individual acts or how prejudiced you think you are or aren't, all of us who are white are complicit in this system of racism because we benefit from it, whether we individually act racist or not. So this book was really important because I think that it serves as a really good call to action, because if you can't name white fragility, and if you are white and you cannot recognize your own fragility, you can't begin to do anything about the problem. I had this Fragile Handle with Care sticker on my forehead if you're doing this just as audio and not visual, but yeah, white fragility is something that we can't begin to dismantle unless and until we name it. We own it for what it is, and we actively work to be cognizant of that in all of our interactions and learn and educate ourselves and take action in order to be anti-racist. I am looking forward to the town hall for the Blackout Buddy read. I also just finished reading White Rage this morning, which I will talk about in next week's wrap-up, and I think I'll probably make a separate video doing a little bit further in-depth review of those later, so look out for that. Okay. Next, I finished up an audiobook, which was The Good Luck Girls by Charlotte Nicole Davis. This was a recommendation from Jerry on her channel Onyx Pages, and this was a really fantastic book. It was a book that I went in expecting to like, and it came out of it being a 5-star read, and I was like, holy hell, I was not expecting that this book was just gonna blow me away the way that it did. But it is about these 5 girls, I think it's 5, let's see, there's Aster, Clementine, Mallow, Tansy, and Violet. Yes, 5 girls. And it takes place in this sort of Weird West kind of universe that is sort of based off of the actual historical West during Reconstruction era in the United States. So the world has been divided into these two groups. There are Duskbloods, who are primarily people of color, and Fairbloods, who are primarily white and light-skinned people. The Duskbloods don't have shadows, and the Fairbloods do, and it has created this sort of like system of oppression where, because it is very easy to single out who is a Duskblood because they don't have shadows following them around, they get sort of sucked into this basically like indentured servitude or like debt slavery that they can never get out of. So it isn't chattel slavery the way that, you know, we think of when we hear the word slavery, but it's really more like debt that you can never get out of. And all of these 5 girls have been sold by their parents or for various different reasons to a welcome house. And that's where the content warning comes in here. All of these 5 girls are survivors of human trafficking, and there are elements discussed in the book of human trafficking and sexual assault, as well as some mentions of drug abuse and suicide. So it does deal with those topics, just to let you know before you get into the book. But it is essentially this story about the girls, 4 of whom are Duskbloods and 1 of whom is a Fairblood. And the Fairblood one has heard that there is this woman out west that they can go to get their like marks of indenture, their favors that are these irremovable tattoos. They can get them taken off and they can get a chance at starting a new life. Along the way, they end up meeting a bunch of different groups of people who are resisting the human trafficking and the Fairblood hegemony in many different ways and shapes. The girls have various different relationships with each other. There's sibling relationships explored. There's queer love between girls explored. There is a really great like friendship unlikely that happens between like the girl that's originally the sort of like bitchy mean Fairblood and then Aster, who's the main character, who's a Duskblood. Normally, I think I've mentioned this before, I don't tend to like stories where like the bully and the person that they bully end up becoming friends. But in this case, I think that the story handled it really well because it was not necessarily, like, the uneven power dynamics didn't carry over into the friendship. Like, those power dynamics had to be addressed and dismantled and challenged before they were really able to connect with each other personally and get, you know, better at becoming friends. I really, really enjoyed this book. Like I said, I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. I enjoyed listening to it as an audiobook, and I really I think that it's going to be a series because on Goodreads it says that it's #1, but the book kind of ended pretty tidily, so I'm not sure if it's like maybe it'll be a series, maybe not, I'm not sure, but I really hope that it becomes a series because I really want to spend more time in this world and with these characters. The next book that I read was the pick for my romance book club that I've been doing this month, and that is The Raycast by Scarlett Peckham, and I did not like this book. I was kind of disappointed by that because I really thought that I was going to like it, but then it just ended up being this... I'm gonna put the tea down. It ended up being like a snooze factory, if I'm being perfectly honest. So it is supposed to be about this woman named Serafina, who is a notorious rake, female rake, libertine, and she is based off of like the character of Mary Wollstonecraft because she's very feminist and she's writing this book about how women deserve equal rights and how shocking that is in like the very late 18th century where this story takes place. And she begins falling for this guy called Adam. He is a Scottish architect. And well, they begin falling for each other, but then sort of nothing really happens until something extremely dramatic and tragic occurs, and then a time jump happens, and then there's just a lot of work that doesn't happen on the page in terms of this storytelling, and what does happen on the page is honestly kind of underwhelming. I didn't really feel that there was much chemistry between the main character and the love interest. This book also fell into a trap that I really dislike, which is that Serafina is struggling with alcoholism at various points throughout this book, and I don't like it when romance books are like, oh, like the person's problems are completely solved and all of their personal failings are totally reformed by the relationship that they're in. And this book kind of had that, where it's just like, okay, well, the love of a good man will cure my alcoholism. Well, no. I mean, like, love and support can help you through very difficult things in your life, including addiction, but it doesn't just magically make it go away. I hate that in books. That was kind of like sort of what was going on here. I didn't really have fun with it. I also don't really understand what the point is of having like male love interests in romance novels be Scottish. I don't really know what the deal is with like sexy Scottish people. Maybe that's just because like that's not very exotic to me. That's part of my family history. So I'm just like, I don't know what's so special about Scottish boys. I don't get the whole Highlander romance thing. So another thing that kind of annoyed me about this book was the way in which Adam would slip into that sort of like romance, poorly written Scots dialect whenever he would get really horny. So not only was it really awkward to have to read that as part of a sex scene, it was just like, oh, you were really leaning in hard to this whole Highlander romance trope. I don't get it, and it isn't done very well. And the fact that it only happens when he's horny, like, some things that I did enjoy about this book, though, was the, like, trope reversal thing with the female rake. I liked even though she was kind of a poor approximation of a Mary Wollstonecraft, I appreciated the attempt, and I also liked the fact that there was just a very, you know, casual queer character who was a side character. Like, that wasn't a huge deal. I always love it when I end up seeing, like, queer people in historical fiction and historical romances, because we were always there, but not always recognized by, like, mainstream history and literature. So that part was kind of cool. I think I'd be more interested in reading, like, a spin-off from this of some of the other side characters who are maybe a little bit more interesting and maybe a little bit less Scottish and horny. So that was my thoughts on the Raycast. What else? Oh, okay, so I started reading NetGalley books this week, which, let me tell you, is a whole new kind of TBR pile to bury myself under. But I read and reviewed my first NetGalley this week, which is a poetry collection called Some Are Always Hungry by Ji-hoon Yoon. And it is a collection of poems that really plays with poetic forms by interspersing them with recipes, which I thought was really cool. It deals a lot with themes of family and family history, Korean history, especially as it intersects with the Second World War and the Korean War, themes of what it is to be a woman, to be a survivor of sexual assault, and I really liked this collection a lot. There were some poems in it that were a little bit weaker than the others in the collection, but overall, as a whole, it was so excellent. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. This is going to be coming out, I think, sometime in the fall. I'll make sure that the release date is listed somewhere below so you have that. But I really liked it. Then I listened to the audiobook of Other Words for Home by Yasmine Wargo. This is a book that I've been trying to read for forever, and I finally got around to it. I ended up giving it 3 out of 5. I honestly thought I was going to like this book a little bit more than I did, but it is a middle grade novel in verse about Judah, who is a young girl from Syria that has to move to the United States with her mom because her mom is pregnant and they have to get out of the country so that they won't be caught up in the war that's going on in Syria currently. I thought that this book was a really good examination of the refugee crisis and the humanitarian crisis that's been going on in Syria, but as told for younger readers that may not necessarily get the whole like scope of what's going on in terms of politics. I think it was written in a very easy to understand way, in a way that made the character I mean, not that like being relatable is the judge of a book's quality, but I did think that like Judah's problems and her issues with like questions about growing up and wanting to fit in and make new friends, but through this specific lens of being a Muslim, a girl who wears hijab, somebody who is an immigrant to this country who is learning English later. I thought that it was very sympathetic and well done. My criticism of the book was that I felt that, especially for a novel in verse, the writing was just too simple for me. Like, if I'm reading a novel in verse, I want there to be a little bit more like craft with the rhythm of the words, and even listening to it via audio, that just wasn't really there for me. So I'm kind of curious then why maybe the author decided to write in verse instead of prose, because I didn't really get the sort of melodic cadence of a verse that I like to have in my novels that are like that, but that might just be a personal taste thing. Like I said, 3 out of 5 stars. That is not a bad review for me by any means. I would definitely recommend this book for anybody that's interested in reading what this is like from a child's perspective, especially if you have a middle grade reader in your life. They would probably really enjoy this. And then I read the book that has taken me 10 days to finish, which is astronomically long for me for a book of this length. And it is the book that made me cry all over my pillow in bed last night when I finished it. And that is The Stars and the Blackness Between Them by Junauda Petrus. Whew. Oh boy. This book is so much more than everything you've heard about it. It's so much more than just the blurb. It's so much more than a story about 2 girls falling in love. It is everything. So this is a story of 2 girls, Audrey and Mabel. Both are Black, and Audrey has been sent from her home in Trinidad because her mom has caught her making out with another girl. So she sent her to Minneapolis, where Mabel is, so that Audrey can live with her dad. And then she meets Mabel at school, and the 2 of them have like the slowest, sweetest, tenderest burn for each other, because as they're sort of starting to figure out their feelings for each other, it coincides with them figuring out what they think of like their own identities, both in terms of their sexuality and also like nationality, what their Blackness means to them. I mean, like, this book bowled me over. I will say that this book does have a content warning for some like mysterious, unidentified cancer-like illness in it, which I didn't know or expect going in, and so like that reveal halfway through the book totally just knocked the wind out of me. But I feel so grateful that I was able to read this story, because it is a story about life and love, and the kind of love that transcends time and space. It is a story about family. It is a story about the importance of creating a world for yourself, no matter what the circumstances of your life are, no matter how limitless or limited you think they might be. I cannot recommend this book highly enough. I don't want to say too many details about it, because part of the joy of the book is just in the unfolding of the story and the way that Junauda Petrus writes it. But I think everyone should read this book because it's just perfection. It's like a nugget of amber honey suspended in the warm sunshine, and all of the delicious joy and experience and history that entails. That might be a really weird metaphor, but it's the one that you're getting. So, and that is going to do it for this week's Geekly wrap-up. I did not really play any games this week aside from Animal Crossing, because my head has just not been in a space for games and books, and also I'm doing like 40 million readathons. So eventually I'll talk about games again on this channel, but not yet. If you made it this far, you like this video, and you'd like to see more of what I do, go ahead and subscribe to my channel. That way you make sure to get updates every time I post a new video. As always, thank you all so very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.